Hey everyone, how's it going today? And welcome back to another second stimulus check and second stimulus package unemployment benefits extension update. So in today's episode is going to be a little bit more of an interesting episode. And I really want to just talk a little bit more about the world right now, about things that are basically going on in the world, and really because of why I think that the need for stimulus checks is particularly even more urgent than ever. Now, technically, it has already been urgent for basically the last, months, who knows, weeks, or yeah, even months. But I think particularly right now, I want to talk a little bit about everything going on in the world and why I think there's such a need for stimulus checks. Now, with that being said, I do still feel optimistic about all of the stimulus package. So I think that is the great news, especially again, as mentioned, is that Pelosi feels optimistic, Trump feels optimistic, the stock feels relatively optimistic, but it's starting to level down. But with that being said, I do think when I think about it deep down, I think that the reason why I feel relatively optimistic about stimulus checks partially is actually because I actually don't feel as optimistic about the world, and really specifically about where we're really currently headed. And it's kind of like how I've mentioned in past episodes, which, by the way, if you are brand new here, consider subscribing and hitting the bell for future stimulus and finance videos. And feel free to comment any thoughts or questions at any time at all. And remember to smash the like button if you can, because it does help to support this channel. But when I think back about it, I think the reason why I feel relatively optimistic is because I don't feel fully optimistic about the world. That's why I feel like, as sad as it is, and when I think about it, how I always have mentioned about how sometimes I get the impression that we are living, especially now, in some kind of time where people have to struggle before something better can happen. People have to actually struggle first. I wish that this was something where people can finally just pass the stimulus and all that to save the world and country before any of this can happen. But I get the understanding that we're kind of living in a time where the destruction, whether this is a protest, a riot, or anything like that, has to happen before any kind of change really starts to kind of happen. So how this really relates is that I kind of feel that I think the reason I feel really optimistic about it is because since I don't feel fully optimistic about the world, I think is that the more the world starts to really struggle, the even greater the need there will be for stimulus checks and stimulus package. And that if they don't try to pass it soon, I feel like with every single day, I think the foresight is just going to get darker when you really think about where we're currently going to be headed. So that's what I really want to talk a little bit about in today's episode. And I think because maybe this is more of one of the more interesting and sincere episodes, and it really actually talks, it's actually a little bit sad when I really think about it. I might even just skip the intro and just go right straight into the video. So earlier today, we have received word that about 787,000 people have officially applied for unemployment in this last recent week. And this number actually is just people that have applied for regular unemployment. So it actually doesn't even include people that applied for unemployment, but for the other special kinds of programs. So for example, for the pandemic unemployment assistance program, some of the self-employed, basically for people that did not qualify for the traditional unemployment, so they had to apply for the other special programs. I believe they say that there's probably about 345,440 people that really applied for that. So when you really add it together, there's basically about 1.1 to 1.2 million people that have filed for unemployment in this last recent week. The previous week is, if you've been here for a while, which once again, another reason to subscribe and hit the bell if you are interested in future videos. But the previous week, we had about 1.3 million people in total, when you include all kinds of unemployment, apply. And in total, I believe right now, there must have been probably about 65 million people that have applied for unemployment between when this whole pandemic started and right now. Now, granted, there are a lot of people that have gone back to work, but at the end of the day, it is still very skewed. And I think it's because in our country, we have about 300 something million people. So when you have about 65 or so million people that have applied, for unemployment, that basically means about 20% of this country has basically been unemployed at some point this year. And this actually doesn't even include the people that have been underemployed. So people that have basically been employed but are working basically really, really basic near minimum wage jobs. So even though they are employed, they're sort of underemployed because they are employed, but they're barely even making enough to really make a living or really be able to get through most days. It has just been reported that about 264,000 restaurants have basically been on the verge or have actually already closed down this year, and probably about another 100,000 businesses that have basically already closed or are certainly on the verge of closing almost completely by the end of this year. Every single one of these businesses represents a certain collection or set number of jobs. So can you imagine that if like over 200,000 businesses are on the verge of closing, that represents at least 200,000 employees, if not potentially over 500,000 employees. Certainly, we can already say that about 1 million people have been applying every single week. So you can really only imagine the picture about this. There have also been many, many chains, such as I think Modell's, Century 21, at least certainly in New York City, that have already either closed or officially announced that they will be closing, and they're having a lot of different clearance sales, which I've actually been to a couple of them. I actually sometimes feel this is one of those years where I actually sometimes feel a little bit guilty for trying to buy some of the things in these stores for such a cheap price, just knowing that it kind of feels like when you get things for such a cheap price, you almost kind of wonder how they're even going to make money. And I think in the real answer is that a lot of them are not. They're actually really just trying to break even. And I think it's that if you've ever tried to start up any kind of small business, one of the biggest things I think you learn is that you really learn about the economic and business world from basically the employer side. And I think it's that from the business owner side, people actually really start to understand how all of the economic market related stuff moves, and also about how expensive it really is to start a business and what it actually takes to be able to run it. And on top of that, there have actually also been a lot of particular industries that have actually been really, really hit. And a lot of these industries are not planning to bounce back for at least certainly a while. I can only comment as someone who's from New York City that Broadway, a lot of entertainment-based venues, events have all basically been canceled or postponed and plans to reopen something into like the spring or even summer of next year. So it's crazy when you think about it that some places, like for example Broadway and certain venues, will basically have already gone through at least 1 year just totally closed. This 1 year represents another collection of people that have officially lost their jobs or have gone unemployed. And the crazy thing is that I think regardless of people's opinion about these industries, because I know there's sometimes people that will make some kind of comment about like this is just like some fun game industry and all that, the reality is at the end of the day, each of these industries, each of these jobs, they represent a set of workers, they represent a group of people. And I think every single person during the lockdown, well, just certainly a lot of people in the lockdown, has probably seen a movie, a TV show, a live recording, or something entertainment based. If not during the lockdown, almost certainly even before the lockdown, a lot of these entertainment stuff like Disneyland, cruises, travel, all that kind of stuff, these are the industries that really bring people together. They have been basically what has saved people's mental health. They have brought people together. They have created a lot of moments of hopefully happiness to some level of extent. And these are the industries that are being hit right now. When it comes to the pandemic right now, as crazy as it is to think, over 41 million people in this world have officially caught the pandemic at some point. And it's really even crazy to think, because if you've actually been following this channel for several months, and by months we're talking about like way back, I made a video many months, like something around earlier this year. If you've been one of the very early subscribers, which once again, if you are brand new here, consider subscribing and hitting the bell. But I did make a video many months ago, like earlier this year, where I talked a little bit about the pandemic and what life was like in New York City and and in Asia right now, and because I was actually living in Asia during that time. Now granted, I wasn't there for vacation. I was there for a lot of like personal based reasons that I had to kind of be there for. But the reality is that at that time period, I still remember sitting down, even getting a haircut, watching my barber, like watching the news on the side while I was waiting to get a haircut. And I remember watching the news where at that time period the pandemic was really only in China, and people were already starting to panic, at least certainly in Asia. Like I don't know about, I think the US was still safe haven at that time, but certainly in Asia, people were already starting to panic. And this was when the global case count was 8,000. Today, it's crazy. I think every single person almost severely underestimated what this pandemic would come. But I still remember following this where the global case count was 8,000. Today, we get over 380,000 cases per day. That is the really, really crazy scale that I never would have imagined. I also found a lot of different graphs, which I'll show up right here, that basically really shows that right now, if you're following international news, the cases are skyrocketing in Europe very, very drastically. And they're starting to actually come back in the US. So I think that based on this, what I foresee is coming next is that I feel that, especially certainly based on the last couple of months, you sometimes get the sense that the US news almost feels like it's kind of just the shadow that follows European news. So if Europe is starting to like lock down or pose restrictions or really go through a round two again, then the fear is that the US can be next. It technically already is. Like you kind of already see the signs in the Midwest, but at the same time, the bright news is that we are still at the end of the day relatively open. I think people are starting to go out again, so that's really the bright news. However, I think that based on what I've learned this year, everything can change very, very fast. And I remember how when the US locked down, it took 1 week where all the businesses, stores, restaurants, the NBA, everything was just suddenly shut down on the spot. You know, I had a lot of different work projects because, as you guys know, I work in the entertainment industry, and they were just suddenly canceled, postponed. We thought it was going to be a month. It became almost 6 months. That's the really crazy thing to think about. And beyond all of this stuff comes basically all of the other crazy independent news, like the wildfires, natural disasters, everything that's really been going on. In politics, there's a lot of political tension right now and a lot of divide, I think, particularly compared to almost any year right now, between everything that's going on in the world of politics. My biggest fear about politics, I feel, is that, as we currently know, is that it's mostly been politics that has been holding up everything. My biggest fear is that if we don't pass the stimulus package very, very soon, I think that a lot of politicians are trying to pass the stimulus package, especially Trump, because I think they're trying to use the stimulus package as a way to look good for the American people to try to gain voters. The problem, right, is that I feel, and I foresight, right, my biggest fear is that once the elections happen, if people, or if the politicians finally learn what the results would be, it maybe will take off the motivation. And we don't know what it is, but my biggest fears is that once that happens, they might start to realize, like, well, you know, we already know we lost, or, well, we already know we won, and now they're just going to move on. That's where there's actually been a couple people and some word right now that people fear that the stimulus package may not even pass for a while. Again, everyone still feels optimistic. I think that is the really, really great news, but I think it's actually exactly because of that. I think the urgency is particularly true because something can happen after elections, whether this is someone contesting results or some more greater divide or people just abandoning different things that have been going on. That's why I think the need is even more urgent right now. And then, of course, beyond this is all of the different parts that relate to ways that I think that this country, or just people, have really struggled this entire year so far. Whether this is a potential economic collapse, some political struggle, some social justice struggle, some personal struggle, something with like climate change, natural disasters, all sorts of really different things that are happening. Especially with a lot of programs that have actually officially ended or will be ending very, very soon, such as the eviction ban, which I believe is about to end like by the end of this year. I just see that I see everything as a very hard time coming ahead. And basically, I think where I'm trying to go with this is that I still do feel optimistic about the stimulus checks and stimulus package, and I know a lot of people do, so that is the great news. But I think one of the reasons why I think is because there's a lot of people that do not feel optimistic about the world, and I think it's that the more we don't feel optimistic about the world, the more optimistic we will feel about the stimulus, because the stimulus checks and stimulus package may be the only few things that's going to potentially save everything right now, because some of the damage has been so drastic that I feel like I cannot envision a recovery, certainly a speedy recovery, if they don't do it soon. That's why I really just wanted to share a little bit of a prediction, a foresight, and much more about where I think everything is really headed, and why I think the need for stimulus checks and stimulus package is even greater than it really has ever been for the last, who knows, like several weeks or even months. But I think the point is hopefully this maybe highlights to you guys that if you are going through some kind of difficulty, that maybe it still is a little bit more comforting to know that you're not alone. And if anything, you're probably with millions right now going through some kind of difficulties. And I think it's that as hard as it is to go through this, I think it's also a lot more comforting when you know that there's other people to maybe go through it with. And hopefully this video really highlights a lot of the difficulties that are really going on in this country. But I'd really love to be able to hear your story. If you're maybe going through something, feel free to maybe just comment down your story, your thoughts about it, your prediction, where you think this world is currently headed. But as always, remember to smash the like button, consider subscribing and hitting the bell if you haven't done so already. It's always greatly appreciated. Thank you guys so much for coming along if you made it this far, and thank you guys so much again. I'll probably make the next couple of videos where we go back to talk very specifically about the stimulus check, so definitely stay tuned to that. Oh, and today's going to be the presidential debates, so definitely remember to catch that. I believe it's at 9 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be a very, very big epic election, so definitely stay tuned for that. Catch it up. I feel like it's one of the most important elections and probably potentially in modern history, so definitely follow in with everything that's been going on. But thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned, stay safe, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.